Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode from the Powerful Women of Harco. Yay! Today, we are excited to talk about voting. Since our state, Maryland, will begin early voting this week, we cannot wait to share with you some resources.
Hi guys, I'm Gina, and I wasn't here for the last one, so I get to introduce I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at a national reining show with a bunch of horses and some sheep. They weren't lying. I really was. So I live in District C. Some of you may know me because I've run for office, and I have been involved in trying to make sure that all of us are represented and that we have an actual democratic process for pretty much decades now. I've been living in Bel Air, Maryland for almost 25 years now. And I am excited at the changes that I've seen, at the number of women, like all of these amazing ladies who have come together and who are starting to say that our voices not only matter, but need to be heard. And sometimes, and many times, are often the best voices to have in the room. So let's keep talking.
I'm Heather.
I'm Vicky. I'm Luce.
I'm Megan.
I'm Jillian.
And I think this is the first time we've all been together.
We're all here.
So earlier today, Jillian and Gina and I sat down with Dr. Amy Rosenkrans and had an interview about the women's suffrage movement in Harford County.
And it was very interesting to learn that the Route 40 corridor, the waterfront properties of Harford County, played such a critical role in the women's suffrage movement in Harford County, and how difficult it was for her to do research and find information on women that participated, which kind of speaks to what we're dealing with now anyway.
Yeah. I think everyone who hears this will realize that, unfortunately, a lot of what Dr. Amy had to say is the same from 1913 as it is today in 2024. What struck me is how little has changed and how some of the same challenges and activities and actions are still happening under different banners today.
So we'll play that interview for you now.
All right, everyone, welcome. Introducing today's guest, Dr. Amy Rosenkrans. Dr. Rosenkrans is a noted expert on the women's suffrage movement in Harford County. She is a lifelong resident of Havre de Grace and has served as an educator in Prince George's County, Baltimore City, and at Havre de Grace High School. In 2021, she was elected to the board of directors of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, as she was recognized for her passionate advocacy for ensuring Maryland women and girls become part of our nation's history. Dr. Rosenkrans is a memorable storyteller who loves to share her discoveries with her audiences. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, this is exciting.
So, women's suffrage. We literally wouldn't be able to vote without it.
Correct.
So tell us about the history here in Harford County. I don't think any of us really know much about it.
So the history of the suffrage movement here in Harford County is absolutely fascinating. And when we talk about the suffrage movement, we all know the big names like Susan B. Anthony,
Right.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul. But the work of the suffrage movement took place with the help and with actually all of the work of local people, of grassroots people.
Just like all politics, really. It all gets down to being local and making sure you do your part.
Exactly. So in Maryland, we had several different movements established right after the 1850s, the 1848 Seneca Falls Declaration. But the real movement started here in Maryland around 1911 with something that was called the Just Government League.
Okay.
And that was founded in Baltimore. And there were Maryland women all across the state that were involved. And what the women of the Just Government League did was they wanted to go out to each county and get the counties involved. And that's when the Harford County women really started stepping up.
And what was the goals of the Just Government League?
Well, the Just Government League was for suffrage.
Okay.
And originally it was to get suffrage at the local and the state level for women because that's where the movement was. But gradually they realized that getting the vote state by state by state just was not effective. So they started for that federal amendment, what became known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment.
Okay. Were there any people involved in this that we should know? I'm sure there were.
Oh, there are tons of women
Okay.
that we should know. We had the Just Government League of Harford County was established in 1913. And one of the most important members of that organization and our standout here in Harford County was a woman named Elizabeth Forbes.
Okay. And what did Elizabeth Forbes do?
Well, she was the vice president for the Harford County Just Government League. She also was very much involved in the federal movement for suffrage. But what the women of Harford County did was that they went around all of Harford County, Havre de Grace, Aberdeen, Edgewood, Fallston area, and they went to lots of different events telling women and men about the women's suffrage movement and getting them to sign on to agree to support the movement. Because really, they needed the men.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They had to have the men.
Yes.
So they went to all sorts of places where the men would be. One of my favorite stories is that they would go to the Havre de Grace racetrack, the Gras.
Oh.
And Elizabeth Forbes drove. This is 1912. 1913. She had her own car. She's driving around Harford County, and she goes to the races, and they start putting up signs at the Havre de Grace racetrack, trying to encourage men to support the suffrage movement.
And how successful was she in the county?
She was pretty successful in the Route 40 corridor.
Okay.
In the Route 40, Aberdeen, Edgewood, Havre de Grace area, she seemed to get a lot of support. And then in the upper reaches in the Fallston area, a lot of the women that were involved were from the Little Falls Quaker Meeting House.
Of course.
So we get the Quakers involved as well.
Right.
And Harford County, because we're a crossroads, because in order to get anywhere, north or south along the East Coast, you've got to go through Harford County. We also become a part of the national movement. And we had the marchers in 1913, the marchers of the suffrage marchers, the suffrage army, marched all the way through Harford County, in particular in Havre de Grace.
Wow.
And she hosted those women.
We have a monument, a placard to her in Havre de Grace now, right?
We do. We have a marker in Havre de Grace at Tidings Park,
Okay.
commemorating Elizabeth Forbes and the work that she did. And not only did she do the work on the movement here in Harford County, but she also was one of the picketers at the White House with the suffrage movement. And she was one of the women that was arrested and thrown into jail.
Wow.
Elizabeth will be the only Harford County woman who was arrested.
Wow.
And all of her Harford County friends for the rest of her life, would call her the jailbird. But she did it for the right reasons, right?
She certainly did.
And she would continue throughout her life to fight for women's rights. Once the vote was won, she worked on educating women and men on the right procedures, how to vote and what the issues were. And then she continued on working for the Equal Rights Amendment, as well as equal pay for teachers in Maryland.
That is fantastic. And sadly, over a century later, we're still doing that same work here in Harford County and in the country at large.
We are.
What lessons can we take from how she approached this successfully?
Persistence.
Okay.
Persistence. It was not an easy thing for a woman of her time to be going out driving her car around and talking to men. Yet she continued to persist. It was not an easy thing to leave her family behind and go picket at the White House, but she continued to persist and to fight for what she thought was right.
So if she had a car and she was able to do that, it sounds like she was from a fairly comfortable economic status.
Yes.
Were most of the women in the Harford County suffrage movement similarly placed socioeconomically?
Much like the women's movement throughout the country, a lot of the women were very comfortable in their lives because they had the money and the time to spend working on the movement. But we do see some... we don't have names yet. We're still looking for names because it's hard to find names of women throughout history. But we do know that there were several union organizations that came through Harford County, Havre de Grace in particular, to talk with the workers at the various factories. During the 1900s, Havre de Grace actually had a lot of different factories. Not only did we have canneries, but we also had... we had linen and we created stockings and different types of clothing and shoes. And we had women workers there. And there were women organizers who were not only organizing for labor, but also for suffrage that came through Havre de Grace to talk to those workers. And we don't have names yet.
How do you go about doing this work? Because as you pointed out, women have been erased throughout history so often.
Yeah. So what has been fascinating about this search is that what I've started was you go and you find an article. For instance, the article I found said that Mrs. Theodore Weems Forbes was vice president of the Harford County Just Government League, because they always had Mrs. So-and-so,
Of
right?
course.
Because they did not have their first names. So it takes a lot of persistence, again, to go into the work. You go through Ancestry.com and you look up Theodore Forbes. Who's Theodore Forbes? And you track his ancestry and you find his wife. So it takes it's detective work. It's a lot of detective work to find these women. You find what's been very disheartening is when you find their obituaries. Oftentimes the obituaries don't even say the suffrage work and the other organizing work that they did. It's all about she was the wife of, the mother of, etc. So that's, again, another reason why these women are lost, because their families, or even maybe they didn't think that should be in their obituary, the amount of incredible work that they did.
Oh, wow. Is there any record of how their families felt about this involvement? Because it sounds like it was a little bit controversial, maybe out of the box for wealthy white ladies to be taking on this.
It depends on the family. With Elizabeth Forbes, by the time she's incredibly involved, she's a widow. So she does not have a husband to tell her what to do or how to do things. So she's got young children, but she continues to do the work. Her family is one of the few families that I've been in touch with that knew about the work that she did. A lot of the families, when I've contacted them and said, I believe that your grandmother so-and-so was a suffragist. What do you know about that? And they're like, what? First of all, they're like, who are you and why are you contacting me? And then second, no, we didn't know that. So it's been really fun to help put family members in touch with some of the good works of their ancestors.
That's pretty exciting.
It is. It's very cool.
And are you the only one who's working on this currently, or do you have a team that's working with you to dig all of this up?
So in Harford County, I'm basically it. I am a part of, as you heard, the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. And as a part of the 100th anniversary of the suffrage movement, the Women's Heritage Center started researching Maryland suffragists. And when I heard about it, I went to one of their talks. I'm like, okay, so what about the women in Harford County? And they're like, if you want to know about them, you're going to have to do it yourself. So that's what I did.
I find it really interesting that in the 2020 election, the Route 40 corridor, we like to call it the waterfront properties of Harford County. Okay.
Which is the truth.
Yeah.
We are.
So, the waterfront properties of Harford County played such a critical role, it sounds like, in the women's suffrage. And so I think that's very interesting that they still play such a critical role. I, unfortunately, don't live on this side of town. I don't get the benefits of all of the good stuff. But it's good to see that the track record has been the same, that this area has been critical in making the change.
Partially, at least with women's suffrage, I think it's because it's the crossroads, like I said before, whether it be old Route 7 or Route 40 or 95 now, that's where people are coming and going up north and south. And there's just more movement of people and things and ideas.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that it's what you said from 1913 it could have been said in 2014, 2024.
Right.
Yeah. There has been so little change in the people doing the work, the people whose voices are going to have the impact, and the people who are willing to stick their necks out and make that change happen.
Yeah, I think what is frustrating, though, in the research is that in Harford County, so far, I've only been able to find white women. And we know that isn't the case at all in the suffrage movement, that African American women and Latinas and Asian women all participated. And in speaking to a lot of scholars and historians in Harford County, and in Maryland, what I was told is oftentimes, depending on the area in which you lived, many African American women would have been doing the work, but it would have been quiet and it wouldn't have been called suffrage, because we know at the time that their men weren't really allowed to vote. They had the right to vote, but there were lots of Jim Crow laws and powers working against them having the franchise. So women would not have wanted to stir things up that might have caused even more trouble for the men who were able to vote. So some of the leading scholars that I've spoken with, Ida Jones at Morgan State, at Martha Jones at Hopkins, they're like, the women were doing the work, but a lot of times it was in the churches and in the community associations, and it just wasn't called suffrage. So because of that, I've not been able to pull any names out yet.
Right. I wonder if some of the churches might have records of supportive pastors or congregations who might have.
So if we look into Baltimore, we know that there were definitely some big Black churches that were doing the work, and there are some names that are coming out of Baltimore. So it's kind of piecing together the connections between the Harford County churches and the Baltimore churches, and seeing who those women and men were.
And again, the echoes of what's happening today are so prevalent.
Now, I missed it, but you guys were here for a lot of what Amy was talking about. And she's a great friend of Havity Grace, and just really admire her and love her. But, was there anything that you think that we should weigh in on, or that you found really impactful from her? Or
I was just so surprised at how literally everything that she said, switch the names, switch the years, and it could have been any one of the many groups who are still doing the exact same work and still fighting the exact same fight. So I think it's really clear that women especially, and certainly communities of color, have been fighting the same battle going into our 3rd century now.
Wow.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
Have we made progress, or are we just constantly moving the goalposts?
Well, that's my question. Like, what is holding us back now? Because one of the points that you brought up was that, the lady had a vehicle. All right. We're at a stage now where women have vehicles. We have these rights. So what is holding us back from moving the goalposts forward? Why are we stagnant?
That's a great question. I did notice, though, that the women that she talked about all had the advantage that is still such an important one today, of privilege.
Exactly.
It was privilege point blank. They had the money. She was a widow. So she had all the money. She had no one to report to. She had inherited all that money. She could park her kids without somebody saying, "What are you doing?" and putting her in an insane asylum, which was literally something that happened.
when you say she, who was the she? Or was it just general?
Forbes, I believe,
Yes,
is her
Miss
last
Forbes.
name.
Miss
Miss
Forbes,
Forbes from
Harvard to Grace?
Yeah.
Okay.
who was
Mrs.
one of
Forbes
the
from Havre de Grace had
more
that
prominent.
option. So, Mrs. Forbes was able to tell her kids, "Hey, I'm going off to do this," without being afraid of being put in a lunatic asylum, without being afraid of being prohibited from seeing her children again, being judged unfit, or any of the things that would have happened to women then and can still happen to them today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we've seen how many women are judged because they put their work on equal footing. They put their needs on equal footing.
So is it an education thing? I know, like, a lot of times I'll see on TikTok, and I see women discussing topics that negatively impact them, like in supporting these things that negatively impact them. And I'm like, is it me? Like,
I think
why did you make this decision? And is it your significant other that's putting this thought process in your head?
I absolutely agree with that. If you think about it, we are not that far off as women from needing a man to literally do anything. I think the most recent step forward was we don't need a husband's signature for a credit card now.
Correct.
And, that was in not my lifetime.
It was in mine.
It's
in mine.
in my mom's lifetime for sure. While she wasn't an adult, she also remembers when her mother could then go out and get a credit card by herself, but her mother still didn't. My grandmother still didn't, because I feel like her husband was still very much in control. So I think
that wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't.
So, yeah.
It wasn't. So I think that the biggest thing that's stopping women now is still there are men who are products from the generation of men are in charge. Men are the primary caregivers. Men are the ones that are doing everything outside of the home. And women are still these meek and quiet and obeying creatures instead of powerful women of Harford County.
Hey, good luck.
I think, Megan, you make a really good point, but I would challenge all of us to think about your point. as applying primarily to white women.
Absolutely.
Because I think if you look at communities of color,
Yes.
it is our women who have uplifted us because our men have been targeted by the carceral system, by, injustice, the, injustice criminal system.
Yeah.
So one thing in honor of Lily Ledbetter, who passed away earlier this week, which you alluded to in terms of why are we still in the same position? I think economics plays a crucial role.
Yeah.
And still, women do not make the same for the same work as men. And if you break it down further, women of color are the lowest paid for performing the same type of work. So I think in terms of voting and why that makes a difference, if you're so preoccupied about survival, about, putting your family forward, feeding them, clothing them, that may impinge on your opportunity to participate in the electoral process. Back to what Miss Rosenkrans said, Dr. Rosenkrans, excuse me, that these were women who had the time and the privilege to become involved. So we have to recognize that we still have those inequities, right? The social inequities, the racial inequities, the economic inequities. So that would be something that we should work to identify.
I think there's also an element, just as institutional racism is alive and well, internalized misogyny is a massive problem for all women. I am old enough that I remember when women couldn't get credit cards. I remember when we couldn't play sports because Title IX didn't exist. All of these things are really relatively new inventions. And it's so important, particularly for younger women, to realize that the basic rights to existence that are taken for granted, the right to play a sport, the right to have a credit card, the right to marry whomever you want, are all very, very new. And they are very, very fragile because they're still seen as inconvenient. They do challenge and threaten. The mostly white male patriarchal system is incredibly fragile and incredibly threatened by strong women. I had the advantage of being raised by a divorced woman in the 1960s. That didn't happen very often. And it's why I have always felt comfortable being loud, being present, taking up that space. But I will tell you that even though I have always done that, it has come at a personal cost. I have felt outside. I have felt excluded. I have felt people being uncomfortable, avoiding me. And I am a relatively privileged white woman. So that's something that has happened relatively recently. And we've all internalized that misogyny. Ask any woman about her body and hear what you say. They won't, the first thing they say won't be, I feel so strong. I feel so whatever. You'll get 7,000 things that they don't like about their body. And that's just their body. Imagine power that actually affects the lives of other people. How have we been taught to avoid that and not process that?
And I worry about our children because, they don't see this as new. They see this, even to me, that stuff is like, that's so foreign to not be able to get a credit card. Right. So, the young girls, they're like, that could never happen. That would never happen. That will never happen. They don't realize it was just recent. And also not having somebody to look up to. Like, how many girls are like, well, when is a woman ever going to, be able to be president when we've had hundreds of years of only men? So, that's exciting.
Representation is respect.
How hard can it be?
Boys do it. But that is a relatively new thing, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Women taking power.
And now we're seeing it before our eyes. And as a boy mom, I'm like putting as much of a spotlight on it for him as a girl mom would do it. I'm saying, look at this. You are living through history because not only is she running, she is the primary candidate on the Democratic side. And I don't think a woman has ever gotten that far. I think the furthest...
Hillary Clinton.
Oh, Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Yes, you're right. You're right. Absolutely.
Who got vilified for daring to wear pants.
Absolutely. And now, unfortunately, she had to pave the way for Kamala.
I have always said they will never let a woman be president until she's vice president first. So
And look at this.
That's-
And look at this.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
It will happen.
We can hope, but it is
Yeah.
so difficult to see, and it's hard for women to see themselves that way, and also, to your point, Heather, to think that it can't be.
Yeah.
The idea that these things can be lost or that they are so recent. And to that aspect, I would say look at the, 18-month, 2-year turnaround and how we've approached DEI issues. 2 years ago, you could get funding if you were a nonprofit for any DEI initiative going on.
Wow.
It was the hottest thing. You had to have it. It was important. Today, we have major corporations publicly saying, oh, those rights things, we don't really want them.
Yeah.
And stepping back, and are they not only getting slammed, they're being supported. So just as easily it can turn. And it can turn on very fundamental rights, because it doesn't get more fundamental than making sure that everybody has a seat at the table.
So what it sounds like is that the women's suffrage movement is still going. We're still.
I
we're
agree.
still there.
I agree.
Absolutely.
I agree.
So my question is, what do we do? So, with the elections coming up, what do we do to empower women with our voices to get people to the polls, to get women fighting for equality? It is very difficult, and I think that we all have this internalized fear with social media being what it is right now. Back in the day, you can, underground railroad things. Now, somebody's going to take a picture of you. Somebody's going to post it. So what do we do in order to still get the work done without fear of backlash?
I thought it was important when she said that so many women did it behind the scenes and didn't get any credit for it. I think we need to start talking about the powerful women that we have and what they're doing in the community, in the country. And this is part of it, letting, other women know that we're here. We're not afraid to talk about it.
And to, I think, uplift powerful women who care about women, not just who are willing to be a placeholder, but who want to do the work. So, we can look at Harford County and see how many women are in positions of power. We have women on the county council. We have women, a female state's attorney. Let's look at whether those women are responsive to the concerns of all women, not just a certain segment of the women who live in this county.
Right.
And once we recognize that, it does take courage. I know some of you have run for political office in this wonderful group. It takes courage to say, you know what, I'm going to challenge that, because that person is really not representing what most women need. Yeah. So
I think it is education, though, just as you were a little surprised to realize, oh, wow, it really was that recent that, there were no sports. These things didn't happen. It is an education, and young women particularly, need to realize how recent the gains that we enjoy are. These are new things. Being even able to talk about salary without fear of being fired on the spot is a new thing.
Yeah.
So we need to educate women to the fact that these aren't things that you can say have existed forever, that you can take for granted. And, I would say 2 years ago, if you asked most women if they thought that access to birth control would be an issue for them, they would have thought that you were hallucinating.
Yeah.
Today, it's real.
an issue.
And women are dying currently because of reproductive health care being denied. So this is, the going back happens. And it can happen brutally and quickly and very easily. So I think, to your question of what do? We educate. We remind women that these things that you take for granted in your everyday life that are critical to your existence, your ability to work, your ability to try to advocate for equal pay, your ability to have diverse workforces, all of these things we all have to stand up for. And if we stand up for them together and in public, like you were saying, like this group does, like other groups do, stand up together, stand up in public. And to Luz's point, we support women. Support women who support women.
Yeah. Do you think there's a systemic aspect to that? Because when you think about, as a woman, if I am married to this chauvinistic man, I want to do the work. I want to make the changes. I want to empower other women. But I am now stuck at home raising children. I haven't worked. I'm not making a sufficient amount of money to live on my own, and now they're taking away the resources. So, I feel like there probably are quite a few women who do want to be empowered, be educated, to move forward and move out of the shadows of the males in their life. But how do they go about doing it without those resources?
First thing you can do is vote, because your husband doesn't know when you're in that voting.
That's right.
Who you're voting
100%. Your vote is your voice. And if it's being silenced at home, especially, use it.
If that's the only thing you can do, that's the most important thing you can do.
And it is the one privilege that every citizen of the United States has. And it is the most important thing. You're not voting for someone that you're going to marry. You're not voting for somebody that is going to be your lifelong idol. You may not even be voting for somebody that you like. What you are voting for is your future. And you need to preserve it.
Just to clarify, because I want our listeners and viewers to be clear. In a general election, which is what's coming up in November, no one can tell who you voted for unless you literally steal a ballot and read it. And that's a federal crime. When we have what we call closed primaries, which is what we have in Maryland, then you can tell if someone voted in their primary. But to be clear, when you're at the voting booth, whether it's through early voting beginning this coming week in Maryland or on Election Day, November 5th, no one will be able to tell for whom you voted. That is the sanctity and secrecy of your ballot. So just want to make sure to make that clear.
So somebody said every single citizen. So who can register to vote?
Everyone who's
Every U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
You can register when you're 16. You can vote when you're 18.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. And in Montgomery County and now Frederick County, non-citizens can vote in local school board elections, but to vote for the presidential, in the presidential federal election on November 5th, you must be a U.S. citizen who's 18 years old. Anything else? Who is registered? Let's not forget.
Register to vote.
Must register to vote.
Registering to
Can a
vote.
convicted felon register to vote?
In Maryland, I believe that they do have the right.
And even like at the detention center, they do have the opportunity to vote. Yeah.
When can you register? What if you come election day and you say, I have decided I'm going to vote? Those girls, they knew what they were talking about.
Great question.
But you didn't register. What are you going to do?
Great question. So Maryland recently approved we have the ability to register same day voting. So you can show up on November 5th, and if you have the adequate documentation, then you will be able to register and vote that same day.
So that's an important, really important thing to bring up, and that's
That
new.
is. Thank you, Heather.
So if you've been on the fence and for some reason you think your vote doesn't count and you're wrong, especially in Harford County, we have elections that are decided by as few as 18 votes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can I ask a question? What do you do if you're not voting because you don't know who to vote for? You don't like either one.
That's when you do the research.
Well, yeah, you got to pick a side. Yeah.
In that case,
Life is about picking sides.
you need to take a look at who's going to protect your interests. Who is going to protect your genuine interests? And you might want to look at what party is interested in individual rights, what party is interested in child care, child credit tax cuts, which party wants to have children fed, which party wants to have children insured, and all of those things.
So Megan, to your point too, I heard someone say, write down the list of things that are important to you, and then go back and do your research and figure out what candidate supports what, and that way you're able to come to your decision.
What are some neutral resources that people can find if they're unsure what party they want to vote for? There's some websites.
Great question. The League of Women Voters has a pretty good.
They're nonpartisan, grassroots.
And they just put out their voter guide?
Is it Vote 411?
Yeah, Vote 411. Yep, they just put that out.
So you go to vote411.org.
Yeah.
And you can look up each candidate and what they've answered to the League of Women Voters about their stance.
For me, I get frustrated with Americans just because we do have a system that allows you even that choice. And as an immigrant who had to pay and do a 300-page test to get the chance to vote, the opportunity. Like my first time voting, I was in there. You could not stop me at rain, sleet, snow, shine, whatever, lack of transportation. And I understand that the system in Harford County kind of puts you in a predicament where if you don't have the resources, we are privileged. You know what I mean? Because we have vehicles to get around. Yeah. You have people that are shut in their homes, and people that don't have public transportation are barely, getting a meal in their mouth every day, that are not able to go out and vote. But I just think that if this is the one time that you need to sacrifice, because in the long term, it's in your best interest. Like I said, for me, I didn't want to spend $800 to get a citizenship. And I doubt that 90% of Americans could pass a citizenship test.
I don't think so.
You know what I mean? But I still make sure, and I've instilled in my girls, having 5 girl children, like that's one of the things that I drill into them. You are going to go out to vote. We have a plan. We are all going as a family on Friday to hit the polls to make sure every single person gets to vote. And when my one daughter was in Georgia and they sent her ballot, I was on the phone with her going over how she needs to fill out her ballot, what she wants to do. And I was very nonpartisan. I said, you research the topics and whoever makes sense to you, because I'm not the same person that she is. And it frustrates me that when I was door knocking and canvassing, so many people had no idea when election day was. No. They didn't even know it was an election year. They really were so, ingrained in what they're doing in their own home that they didn't think about how these elections impact all of us.
Yes.
I know we're running out of time. So one of the last comments I wanted to make is for everybody to remember that politics is local.
Yes.
And so that if you register to vote, you've just got to remember to vote for your local politicians. That's so important. Your county council, your board of ed, your mayors, your city council people, because they affect what's happening around you every day. And so don't just look at the national. I know when I was in college, a lot of people just voted for the presidential election, and you don't think about where you are, what's going on, and you complain. But it's not the president of the United States who's going to make those changes. Right. You have to make sure that you look at your local legislation and that you put someone in there that represents your values.
And same with the ballot question.
Very true.
Yes.
Yeah.
All politics are personal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's something that we need to remember. They're personal and they're intimate and they are local, because that school board member may prevent your child from learning something about themselves that could save their lives. We've seen it in Harford County. We've had some very raucous board meetings where citizens have made a difference. And if you ever doubt that your voice makes a difference, go back and take a look at some of those meetings. Yeah. Because things were changed because people stood up and said no. That's the only thing.
So you register to vote now, you vote in the presidential election, and you'll be all set. You're all registered when it's time.
That's right. Just vote every office, every time.
Yeah.
And your ballot question.
And your ballot, every office, every time, and your ballot question.
And you can get those ballot questions. I know there have been several times where I've gone into the booth and I'm like, what does this mean? And I have no idea. Look them up. You will, if you don't register the same day, they will send you a ballot sample.
Yes.
Prior to the election. You can look at all of your choices for the people that you can elect. And then it will also have the ballot questions on there. I personally did not know until that came out that, what was it? Question 1 was even up for something to vote on. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Right.
This is so important. I'm so glad that they sent that to me. So don't just throw those away. Open them up. See what your options are. Research.
In Harford County, we have a statewide question, and then we have a county
local
question.
Yeah.
That's important to look at. So when are we voting?
November. Well, you can
November
start
5th.
this
Thursday. Starts this Thursday.
October 24th. There are 4 locations: Edgewood,
McPhail,
I think Jarrettsville, yes. And then what's the 5th? Havre de Grace.
Yes. Havre de Grace.
Yes. 4 locations to vote early, and then on election day, you can go to the Harford County
Board of
Elections to look up your polling place.
And I would say if you have a problem with transportation or you need to get somewhere, ask somebody or contact the whatever party you're aligned with.
Listen, use your social media.
Use your social media. Put it out there. there will always be someone who is willing to give you a ride and make sure that your voice and your vote gets counted.
Lyft and Uber usually have. They donate.
The free,
Yes,
they have a
on
certain amount of
election
rides.
day.
So,
Do we have any groups that are setting up buses or transportation? I know they've done that before.
They've talked about
Reach out to your RCC or your DCC.
Yeah. Reach out to your local committees, your party committees, and find out if you're not sure. See what resources are available.
Yeah. And there's the souls to the polls. Some churches have. Before we go, I think it's important. Once you are at the polling place, a couple of really important things. If you are disabled, differently abled, under the law, under federal law, you have a right to bring in an assister of your choice. If you need help filling out the ballot, if you need help getting inside of the polling place, this is federal law that guarantees you access, and it allows you to choose the person of your liking. As long as they're not your union rep or your employer, then you can bring in anyone you want to help you actually effectuate your vote inside of the voting booth. And the second thing, for those of us who have communities that are not fully proficient in English, there is a federal law that allows persons who are U.S. citizens, who are eligible to vote and registered, and who want to do so, to bring in their assister of choice to the polling place for purposes of translating the ballot and assisting in completing the voting process. So if you fall within one of those categories and you are finding trouble, you should call there. I should have brought the 1-800 number for the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. They will be all day on November 5th. They're fielding calls now because other states have begun their in-person early voting. And that is a federal crime if people are not allowing you to vote and you are disabled or you don't speak English sufficiently well. So just wanted to remind folks in our county that we are not immune from federal law.
And this came up the last election, and I want you to address this as an attorney. Can you bring something in with you, a piece of paper, if you want to remember, all that kind of stuff?
can you take a picture? Like, oh, look what I did.
Those are different questions.
Yes, they're different questions.
So, my bad.
Can you take a picture of your ballot and publicize it? That is your choice. But
there were some celebrities that did that, and they got into trouble for doing that. I thought that they had been like fines or
I thought it was no phones in the polling.
Yeah.
Some places have a rule, not all. In Maryland, I don't think that you can take pictures inside of a polling place.
That's what they
just take your picture outside. Get your sticker.
Right.
Go outside.
And
get your card.
In terms of bringing
aids,
you can bring a sample ballot.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That is it.
Like if you have an Apple ballot or a piece of paper,
Likely no. So you can bring, and this is what I think one of you mentioned, either Jillian or Megan, you get your ballot. That's really important. It's a sample ballot from, the Board of Elections. You are allowed to bring that in. Mm-hmm. So use that, but they likely won't allow you to bring in like notes or, like anything else that could be construed outside of that sample ballot, right? So you can, and my parents often do because they forget a lot of the things we talk about and they ask. So it's okay to bring in that sample ballot.
So that's why it's so important to study that, like Megan said.
Yes.
Study it, maybe even mark it up and bring it with you.
There you go.
Excellent suggestion, Megan. Yep.
All right. So next time we see you, we will know who are.
Some of us will have champagne.
Somebody will.
We'll see We'll see if you have a country.
We'll see if we're all packing up.
Oh my goodness.
Next time we'll talk about the election results. So see you then.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Be safe. And vote.